black pioneers who came here early and got land. And so for presentation on the 1847 Kentucky slave raid is our third of the season. She is co-chair of the James E. and Sarah Bow House, and she leads tours of the Benign House and the what is it called? Oh, the Benign Carriage House. So she's an award-winning author, artist, and illustrator, and she's been recognized by the Michigan Historical Society, the National Park Service, and the Michigan Birds Account. Her booklet on the Kentucky raid is described as a faithful rendition of this infamous incident. So, it's all yours.
All right. Good evening. I'm about to tell you one of the most exciting anti-slavery events to happen in Michigan, the Kentucky slave raid of 1847. In the spring of 1847, two large groups of slaves escaped from their Kentucky plantation. The first group was 22, the second group was 11, and included Perry Sanford. And they made their way to Young's Prairie in Cass County, Michigan. The Kentucky slave owners heard rumors that their slaves were staying and working on Quaker farms. They hired a man by the name of Carpenter. Carpenter pretended to be an abolitionist. He went from Quaker farm to Quaker farm. I tell you what, those Quakers are real friendly. They invited me in. They fed me. They even left me stay in their homes. Once I found out what farms those slaves were staying at, I drew a map and I sent it back to Kentucky. In August of 1847, 13 slave catchers come into the area. They brought a tobacco wagon to haul their slaves back in. They stopped just 2 miles south of Josiah Osborne's farm. They left their tobacco wagon there. They broke up into smaller groups. One group went to the Osborne farm, where there was a family of 5 staying in a cabin close to the Osborne house. A mother, a father, a daughter, and 2 sons. The slave catchers break in. The mother and daughter escape out the window. The father and 2 sons are shackled. Josiah Osborne sends messengers out to his neighbors, and all of his neighbors come to his farm. The slave catchers are about to start heading south when they're surrounded, and they go from the Osborne farm to the Odell Mill. Another group, led by Reverend Stevens, went to the East Farm, where there was a mother and her baby staying in one of the cabins. And she could hear them going from cabin to cabin. And she knew soon that they would be coming to her cabin. She escapes out the window. She runs, she hides in the woods. In her panic, she left her baby on the bed. Reverend Stevens breaks into the cabin. The woman, she got away. But then he spots the baby on the bed. I know how to get her back. He picks the baby up. He takes the baby outside. He makes the baby cry. The mother, hearing her baby cry, she comes out of hiding, and he captures her. And they go to the Odell Mill. On Henry Shepherd's farm, a man named Merriman is staying. Merriman had been sick ever since he arrived. When the slave catchers break into the cabin, he tries to fight them, but they overpower him and capture him. On Zachariah Sugar's farm, William Casey, his wife, and his daughter are staying in the cabin. The slave catchers break in. Mrs. Casey escapes out the window. William Casey picks up a 3-legged stool, and he gives great battle. He strikes his young master a mighty powerful blow. His young master would die later on returning home to Kentucky. But they overpower William Casey and beat him dreadfully and capture him and his daughter. Mrs. Casey's running through the cornfield when her young master tries to capture her. But she's too much for him, and she gives him a beating right there in that cornfield. And she makes her way to Zachariah Sugar's house and alerts the family and goes back into hiding. On Stephen Bogue's farm in the cabin, Joe Sanford, his wife, and his daughter, a man named Rube Stevens, and Perry Sanford are staying. At 4 o'clock in the morning, they hear a knock at the door. Joe goes, "Who's there?" A voice replies, "A friend." They all recognize the voice. It's the voice of Jack Graves, Joe's slave master. Jack Graves starts pounding on the door and he's yelling, Joe, let me in." But Joe doesn't let him in. Joe starts yelling, "Murder, murder," hoping somebody would hear him and come to his rescue. Then Jack Graves takes his double-barrel shotgun. He sticks it through the window of the cabin. Joe picks up a hickory stick. He strikes Jack Graves with the hickory stick. Jack Graves drops the shotgun in the window, and he leaves. None of them pick up the shotgun, and Jack Graves and others soon return. They break into the cabin. They capture Joe, his wife, and his daughter. Bruce Stevens is up in the loft. He jumps down, he runs out the door. Perry Sanford's up in the loft. The cabin has a shake roof. He pushes his shakes aside, climbs out on the roof, jumps down on the ground. If you ever see Lively running, that's what I was doing. I lost those slave catchers in the cornfield, and I made my way to Mr. Bogue's home. Mr. Bogue, the slave catchers broke into the cabin. They took Joe and his family. Mr. Bogue gets on his horse, and he rides into Cassopolis. Hannah Bogue secrets me upstairs, and I can look out the window and I can see what's going on. Bruce Stevens had made it to William Jones's home. William Jones told the women that were there, women, go hide in the cellar. He told the men, men, go hide in the woods. He mounts his horse and he rides over to Stephen Bogue's home. The slave catchers are there. They have pistols and Bowie knives. William Jones, a Quaker, he doesn't have any guns, but he tells them that he can shoot as fast as they can. And he stays there and he talks to them until Stephen Bogue and 30 others come from Cassopolis. And they go from Stephen Bogue's home to the Odell Mill in Vandalia, where it's estimated between 100 and 300 people had gathered. The slave catchers had guns. Some in the crowd had guns. There was a fear that violence would soon erupt. Josiah Osborne and Edward Lee Quakers spoke to the crowd and kept the situation calm. Josiah Osborne spoke to the slave catchers, and they agreed to have their case settled in court in Cassopolis. The Cass County Commissioner's out of town. The Marion County Commissioner's in town. Ebenezer McIlvain. Here's the kicker. He's an abolitionist and a conductor on the Underground Railroad. He adjourns the case for 3 days, and then he left blacks testify against their slave owners, which was unheard of. Then he turned to the Kentuckians and said, prove your case. We have the 1793 Fugitive Slave Act law that says we have the right to come into free states and take back our property. We have ownership papers that says these are our slaves. We have a copy of our state constitution that says Kentucky's a slave state. Overruled! McIlvain overrules. Your copy of your state constitution isn't certified. He says the Kentuckians home empty-handed. The 9 freedom seekers are rushed over to Ishmael Lee's home in Cassopolis, where there are 31 others waiting. Zachariah Sugar wore a big white hat, and he was proud of his team of horses. He took those 40 freedom seekers from Cassopolis up to Schoolcraft, to Dr. Nathan and Pamela Thomas's home. From there, they would travel to Battle Creek, to Aressa and Sarah Hussey's home. From there, they would travel to Detroit, cross the Detroit River into Canada. Later on, the Kentuckians would try to sue in civil court in Detroit. Again, they were turned away empty-handed. But for some, the court cost was high, and they had to sell their property and leave the area. Our saying is, sometimes it costs a lot to do the right thing, but it's always right to do the right thing. In 1884, Perry Sanford, now a citizen of Battle Creek, told his story to the Sunday Morning Call, and that's the story of the Kentucky slave raid of 1847.
Anybody have any questions for Cindy? That was pretty good. Yeah. While Kathy's here, can you come and, would you like to come and tell a little bit about the Benign House, or would you like to have Cindy do it?
Cindy has more to say.
Sure. Okay, good.
I get the honor and privilege of doing the Kentucky slave raid of 1847 at the Benign House, where I'm a docent. The Benign House is the home of James E. Benign and Sarah Bogue Benign, Quakers and abolitionists. The front part of the house was built in 1845, and the porches and the tower in the back part were added in 1870. You can come visit the Benign House from 2 to 5, Monday through Fridays. And also, Now we also have the Bogue House that we open up, so you can go see where Perry Sanford hid at, and you can see where other freedom seekers hid in the attic of the Bogue House. And you can go into the carriage house as well. On the 3rd floor of the carriage house is where they gave freedom seekers food, shelter, and clothing before they would go on to their next station.
Is there any discussion or material about how the fugitive slaves were treated at these places? In other words, they may, at one extreme, been told, look, we'll help you, but don't bother me, stay out of it. At the other extreme, they could have been basically accepted as a member of those families. Any evidence as to what went on there?
Calvin is a fine example of free blacks moved into Calvin Township. There was like over 100 farms owned by black farmers in the 1860 census. So in our area, I call it our bubble area, because in this area, blacks were welcomed. They could buy their land in Michigan. That was one of the big things that drew a lot of blacks to Michigan, because they could own the property in Michigan. They could start their farms, they could have their businesses. If they wanted to continue on to Canada or other places, that was their choice. James E. actually in 1853 purchased 640 acres of land, Section 33. He invited free blacks and freedom seekers to come clear their land. They could use the wood to build their houses. They could sell it. They could use it for firewood. They could work for anybody that they wanted to, save up their money, purchase their own farms. Their children got to go to school. It became known as Ramp Town, R-A-M-P, because of the wild leeks that grow in our area. So in Michigan, when they were traveling, they were much welcomed.
So it sounds like not only welcome, but there was a serious move to integrate them into the business of things so that they could accumulate a little bit of wealth and afford to buy property. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, you are. And a lot of free blacks.
Yeah, I'm Kathy LaPointe, treasurer of the Underground Railroad. So, I work together. This Young's Prairie was Calvin, Porter, and Penn townships. That's the safe haven in Michigan. There were 2 trails on Underground Railroad that ended in Vidalia. So that's this saving because of the Quakers that moved there to escape slavery in 1830s early. And some of them became station masters on the Underground Railroad. We had 9 stations, and you heard Cindy talk about Osborne, East, Bogue, Sugar, Isaac, Bonan, James Bonan, all clustered in these areas. Detroit was welcoming, but I can't say all of Michigan. We around here because of the Quakers early and the free black immigration middle 40s 1840s and early 1850s. They, like Cindy, under the Enhanced Slave Act, they had property, and it's amazing to see on the plat map over 100 black-owned properties. And not only the Quakers, but other abolitionists, and this welcoming, and George Redfield from Edwardsburg was a New York speculator, and he bought up a lot of land, but wouldn't call himself abolitionist, but he sold land to free blacks, $5 an acre, 20-year terms. He was wonderful. And so looking at Calvin, I'm sorry, we were concentrating on the Kentucky raid, but we has a big story. So please come. We're not officially open, but Cindy's at the Bonine House every day, and most days. And you know, when you see open signs, please visit. We have a Calvin room, a Quaker room. We have, you can go in the carriage house, see a wagon like they come up in, and like Cindy, the Vogue House is 1820 cabin, squatters cabin, and with a garret and attic, and you can go in that attic and just know how people, freedom seekers, how they felt. And so we've been 10 years gathering this story, and its destiny just keeps happening. But please, you know, it's all our story, and happy to share it. So, Cindy.
As Kathy says, the Kentucky slave raid of 1847 is just one story in a novel about the Cass County and the Underground Railroad. There are many chapters that we have started to work on to tell this amazing story to everyone who stops in at the Bonine House, visits our website. Kathy forgot to mention our research library. And there is so much information in there. When I'm there, and I now officially give a warning, I go, when you go up to the second story, there is so much information in there. It may take you hours, but don't worry, I'm here for your duration. And so I have been downstairs, and all of a sudden it's all quiet upstairs. And I go upstairs, and there's people, and they have all this information out. There's binders and books and plot maps that kind of direct you where you want to go to. And learning more as we go. I find out new information, and we share our information back and forth about schools. Everybody thinks that schools were integrated in the 1950s and 1960s. Well, in our little county, there are several schools that were integrated in the 1840s. Blacks and whites were going to school. The Brownsville School was opened up around 1840s and closed in 1957, because that's when they took all the one-room schools and they put them all together. But they were integrated since the day they were open. And that's another amazing story of our area. Any more questions?
Do you ever have descendants of the original freedom seekers that came through this area stop into the Bonine House?
We have what we call the Wax Museum in a box. All you do is add a student. That has been going on since 2012. And we have at Sam Adams Elementary School, there have been descendants of freedom seekers, free blacks, and of the Bonine family and other Quakers. They get to pick out a character that they would like to portray. They get to dress up. They get to do a field trip to the Bonine House, and you walk up and you touch it like a little dot they would put on their hand or on their prop, and they will come alive and they tell you who they are. So that's very thrilling for me to watch these kids light up about telling about their family history.
So, I have a couple more questions here. As a freedom seeker is coming north on the railroad, they're going to bump into station masters along the way. Is there a charge for one, assistance to get me through? Is there a charge for food or housing?
No. Station masters gave food and shelter to freedom seekers. They were not in it for the money. They were there because they believed that slavery was a sin against God and man. They wanted to abolish slavery right then and there. So that was their compassion for their fellow man, that they wanted to help them get free.
And the Quaker line crossed the Ohio, and since I just developed praxia of speech, so I apologize.
No, you're doing great.
But,
You're doing fantastic.
But the Quaker line went to Wayne County, Indiana, Richmond, and north to Bristol, and to Evangelia. All those stations were Quakers. So and most of our freedom seekers came up that line. And the other, the Illinois line crossed the Mississippi and came toward Chicago to Niles and over. And many came that way too, not Quakers, but a lot of religious and just ethical people. But the Quaker line was, were most concerned or know the most about. They were Quakers.
still have, seen a lot of churches in the area, I guess never encountered one that specifically said Quaker. Do we still have a Quaker community here?
So before Quakers were called Quakers, they were the Society of Friends. And we have the Penn Friendship Church that is on Penn Road in Vandalia.
Who was the most successful slave, like that made a lot of money when they came north?
Who is the most successful? It depends on how you mean that. Because in Calvin Township, they became township leaders. Well, actually, I should say, Mr. Hawks, Samuel Hawks, he paid the most taxes in Calvin Township. So if you go by that, yes. And Booker T. Washington wrote a book called 2 Generations of Freedom, which tells some of the Calvin Township farm owners and businessmen that made their success in that area. And then if you go to Battle Creek, you have them taking on political jobs, representing blacks. And so that was around 1870s, 1880s in that area. So,
Calvin became self-governed and elected their own school supervisors and got, if they were light enough, got to vote in general elections. This, the color was a big issue and throughout the African American experience. And Calvin is very, the free blacks that came here, you can see in our Calvin were beautiful people. And so they were accepted and respected and blended in the, so we, that was a part of the story.
Wow.
Yeah.
You guys really should go up to the Banana House and see it. They have a fabulous, extensive research library on the Underground Railroad and on the families.
Yeah,
that
and
came
it
here.
is on our website, so for comfort at your home, our library is on our website, urscc.org, and you can read.
But I think if you go to the Bullseye House, it's a wonderful experience. Everything comes alive. There's just so much information there. Pictures on the wall.
Anyway, I got a couple of through statements here. I was raised in Calvin Township. I went to Calvin Hill District number 3, one-room school.
Me too.
This was in the early 40s. And it was probably 3/4 black when we went there. And another thing, you're talking about Calvin Center. I think Calvin Center, this is some of the research I went through. I think years ago it was called Day. Do you know that by any chance?
Yeah, that Calvin Center was called Day.
Day instead of Calvin Center.
I know there's Day Lake Road, and that's where the Day family kind of lived at in that area. But I don't know if Calvin Center was ever called Day.
I was kind of under the impression years ago it was called Day. But the third thing I want to state, you've got these homes, these 4 homes you have on here. Are those the only homes you have where slaves have stayed? The reason why I asked, quite a few years ago, when I still had the heating business, I was called to a house on South O'Keefe Street in Cass. It was a very, very old house. They gave me the combination to get in. I was supposed to check the furnace because it was sold. I don't think anybody wanted to buy it too bad because there were about 7 or 8 different realtors' cards on the table there. So they finally got it sold and they called me to inspect the furnace. So I go in this house. There's not a bit of furniture in it, no carpet or nothing. The boards, the flooring is boards. It's not a hardwood flooring or anything like that, just boards nailed together. I went to go to the basement. And most usually, well, I looked all through the house and there was no furnace on the main floor, so I figured it must be in the basement. Most usually, the basement stairway, this was a 2-story house, is under the steps that go upstairs. So in this house, the steps started in the corner up halfway and then the other half in the corner of the house there. There was a door under the steps that went upstairs. I thought, well, here we go to the basement. I opened that door up. It's just a closet space. I looked for a trap door all through that whole house. I could not find another way to get to that basement. And I went back to these stairs again, and I got looking pretty close. Here's a cable. Here's a cable. These whole stairs to the first landing lifted up, and that was the opening to the basement. So I just wonder how many slaves, if that's what it was used for, how many slaves were hidden in that basement?
Wow.
That's it.
There's another story for you.
So now I gotta research a house on South O'Keefe. Find out if it was a bootlegger's house or a place to hide freedom seekers at.
I could find a house for it. I don't know the numbers now, but I remember the house, and it had beautiful woodwork under where the roof comes down over the eaves and that. So it was somewhat of a fancy house in the state. Oh, another thing. I walked all the way around the house thinking I could find a basement outside stairway. There was not an outside stairway, but there were some windows. But they were the glass brick to let light in, but you can't see through them. So I think they had them hit pretty good.
We closed the Bonine House, the Carriage House, and the Vogue. The first one is Brownsville School, and we haven't closed on that any minute. There 3 years and getting that. There was a mark on that title, 1860, and it's been excruciating to clear that. But like your school, it was integrated, and this could be the first public school integrated in Michigan, maybe the country. I can find evidence against that. This legacy of Underground Railroad, free blacks had their own farms, and many worked for white farmers, and all the kids went to school together. On an 1850 census, they list kids going to school, white and black. And so it needs a lot of more research, but there were plenty of private schools throughout the country that were integrated, but public schools, no. So your experience is unique, and if anything you have, when Brownsville
I didn't go
is.
to Brownsville, I went to Calvin Hill.
Well, no, but
Yeah.
Brownsville is going to be a repository for all the integrated schools in their area. So we invite you to donate whatever you will. We'll have a space for each school. So that's great. And your house in Cass could be, it certainly could be, and we don't have knowledge of that, but certainly could be.
Even the restrooms are integrated, because there was 2 individual houses out the back of the school.
I love that. You know, we're going to academic gathering on Saturday, and they're preaching how Michigan didn't integrate to 1960s, and we're hearing, wow, what about us? This story was almost lost. And, the black community didn't want to talk about it. The white community didn't care. And so it was in a couple history books and a couple PhDs, dissertations, but 2000 to 2010, we say all these Quakers, free blacks, and freedom seekers just said, knocking on our door. We have a story to tell, and it's just been destiny. It just keeps coming. We think we have most of our story now, but every day there's new. And so we're concentrating on restoring these buildings as focal points for telling this story.
Thank you, Kathy.
Oh,
Anybody have any other questions?
I'd like to say, my wife's grandfather, Thurl Carter, taught as a young man, he taught at East School. East School is right at the corner of Union Road and Brownsville. And he used to tell about, he had students, black and white, and he used to tell about, most of them didn't have any shoes, they come barefooted. And then the snow and the cold, and then he'd have to get the fire going so he could get some of these kids to get their feet thawed out before he could teach them. So I know that, like somebody said, it was integrated schools, so. And that was in the early 1900s.
Wonderful. And please, we want all that information, photos, artifacts, stories. It will be just fun and important.
We have cookies.
Yeah, so one last question for me, and it was kind of touched on earlier, but have you come across any of the products of the school system that became pharmacists or biologists or doctors or engineers or designers? I mean, because it's quite a story.
Okay, so, we, right now, like, we're, a lot of children's names, like, we would love to have, like, a superintendent book that would have a list of these children's names that went to these schools. So we can say, okay, well, this is what this person did. They became their, they took over their farmer's business. I know the story of people that left the area to pursue a higher education, and they left the farm behind. So there are stories of educational success.
And they took their education very seriously, right?
Yes, they did. Because the more you know, as they say, the more you know, the further you go. So if you were educated, you know how to read and write, nobody could pull anything over your eyes. And learning how to read and write was a lot of times, some places it was against the law to educate black people. And you would suffer the consequences if you did. And so education was important because they knew they learned how to read newspapers, so they could read newspapers, they could read about jobs that were available to them to go out into the area and get jobs. So so we don't have like all this information about, little Tommy, he went to school here, and then he became a doctor. We don't have that trail of, to get us to that point.
We have many success stories from that area. Denner's Archer, mayor of Detroit, Calvin. Many doctors, educators, government figures. So we don't have that information. Our Calvin room is new, and we're inviting the black historians local to contribute. We have several, but I understand why people are not just jumping in. But that said, we were over the years, I think we've proved ourselves. We want to tell the whole story. And at first, it was Quakers and quilts, and but it was our intention from the beginning to black and white, because free blacks and other blacks were never credited with Underground Railroad, and they did a lot of the early churches and the forms and they, relatives came out and stayed with them. And so it's a big part of the story.
Any other questions?
When you acquired Bonine House, it had already been a place that had been rented out, correct?
No.
No? Because
No.
I thought I knew a woman who
So-
lived there and had rented it.
So, the Bonine house is, our house is the brick house on the corner of M60 and Pin Road.
Uh-huh.
Then there's the carriage house. And then there was the White House that was also owned by the Bonines. It wasn't owned by James Bonine, but it was a Bonine house. And people rented that house for years and years.
Okay.
And unfortunately, nobody knew the historical value of that house, and unfortunately, it was torn down by the farmers to make more field, plant more crop.
Now, your property, do you ever find stuff around there, like out in the yard or something?
Oh, we ever find stuff.
Ink wells, and lace,
Yeah.
but we haven't explored the outhouses.
Let's not.
And we're waiting. So.
For what?
Well, until we're done. Bonine sold in '53 to another Quaker family their rights. They sold to two black women from Chicago, and they raised their family 80s and 90s. They sold to Tom Crosland and Rainbow Farm, and he, of course, he was killed, and his estate was bought and just sat there for 10 years, and just, we had 6 months to save it. It was crumbling. And so we bought the Bonine and Carriage House in December of 2010. And Bonine is almost done. And it's, but Carriage House is structurally secure, and we're raising money to take those front buildings away. It's this ramp barn, so it's going to be beautiful.
Okay, any more questions? All right.
We have cookies.